Well, hi there, everybody, and welcome to John and Carol at Home. By the way, I'm John, and you are?
Carol.
Yes.
Welcome.
And we're excited today because we have a
are.
very, very special guest by the name of John Burke.
Mm.
And John has written an amazing book called Imagine Heaven. And it is a fantastic account of processing and understanding a lot of near-death experiences. And so, John, welcome. Thank you so much for
Yes.
being with us today.
We are so
Well, it's a
excited.
privilege. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, well, it's so good to meet you, because Carol and I have so enjoyed your book. We read it in January. It was one of our pastors gave it to us as a Christmas gift.
Right. Mhm.
And we just loved it. And so
We
we read it
did.
again very slowly
Yeah.
and just soaked in it and meditate on it because there were so many exciting nuances
Mhm.
about what heaven's going to be like. And you really did help us imagine heaven.
So exciting. You know, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 2:9, but just as it is written, things which the eye has not seen nor the ear heard, and which have not entered into the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. And met your book just
Yeah,
opened our
it just gives
imaginations, like
a lot of credence to that scripture,
I
doesn't it?
know.
Well, John, 30 years ago, you were an engineer and somewhat of an agnostic. What happened to you that you are now a pastor, and so there was obviously some big changes. How did you get into all of this?
Yeah, well, a little accidentally. My father was actually dying of cancer when a friend gave him the book that contained the first research on near-death experiences. It actually coined the term, which it's not a great term because the people that I interviewed weren't nearly dead. They were dead, like no heartbeat, no brain waves, in some cases for minutes, in some cases for hours. And yet they were resuscitated and they came back to talk about the life to come that they experienced. And I was an agnostic. I didn't really believe in much of anything. I didn't know if there was a God. I thought Jesus was probably just a good teacher. I just didn't really care about it. But my dad's dying. I see this book. I read it one night, and I said, "Oh my gosh, this God Jesus stuff may be real," because so many of the people talked about experiencing this God of light and love, who many of them knew to be Jesus. So that kind of opened my mind. And the next year I was invited into a small group Bible study, and I started to study the scriptures and what Jesus taught. And I started to understand grace, and I came to faith. And since then I've moved from a career in engineering into ministry and started a church for skeptics like me. And we've seen many people come to faith. But yes, over the last 30 years, I've also studied over 1,000 of these near-death experiences, trying to reconcile, okay, well, how do these fit with what the scriptures say? And after studying about 1,000 of them, I wrote Imagine Heaven really to show what an amazing correlation there is. When you look at not necessarily what an individual interprets their experience to be. And that's really important because I try to explain that after interviewing so many of these people, what I've concluded is that their experience is like describing so we live in a three-dimensional world of color, right? But imagine if this experience was really being lived on a flat black and white picture on the wall. Death means separation. So at death, you're ripped out of your two-dimensional realm and brought into this three-dimensional realm. So extra dimensionalities with color. And then imagine getting pressed back into the flat black and white world and trying to describe 3 dimensions of color.
Oh yeah, you just can't do it really.
And that, I believe, is what near-death experiencers, in fact, they even say, it's like expanded dimensions. And so I read this and came to faith and started studying it. And I wrote Imagine Heaven to show the amazing correlation between the commonalities these people report all around the globe, by the way,
Yeah.
and what the Bible's been saying all along about the promise of the life to come.
Well, we'll talk about that a minute,
Yeah.
because it's different faiths and different persuasions, but that yet they all tend to see the same sort of common experiences on the other side, to use that term. So what about that? What does a Hindu see? What does a Muslim see?
Well, yes. There are common experiences all around the globe, and they're good ones and they're hellish ones. So there's both, and you have to take account for that as well. But the common experience is when someone dies, they say they leave their body, and generally they are up above their physical body in a new body, a spiritual body. Now, interestingly, the Apostle Paul talks about this. I actually believe that the Apostle Paul had a near-death experience. In fact, if you look in Acts chapter 14, Paul is stoned to death in Lystra.
Yeah.
He's dragged out of the city, dead, and left for dead.
Yeah.
The believers gather around him and pray for him, and he jumps back up and goes back into the city.
Yeah. I know.
Wouldn't go back into the city where they just killed me, but he did. But Paul then in 2 Corinthians 12 says that 14 years ago, I was taken up into paradise, into the third heaven, he says.
Right.
Whether in my body or out of my body, I don't know. Well, why doesn't he know? Well, because just like Indy ears say, we still have a body. When we leave this body, we're still ourselves. In fact, we're more ourselves than we've ever been. And not just with 5 senses, more like with 50 senses. So this experience of life is actually a very reduced experience of what God created us to experience.
Well, Carol's a real color person, so she's just getting all filled up with people talking about the colors and new colors and this and that.
And the grass doesn't, go down, and you can pick a flower, and I'm just so thrilled.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's like
it's such life in it, John.
And that's the big misunderstanding that I find even Christians have, is we picture it somehow more ethereal, intangible, less real and solid than this life, and yet nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, this life, if anything, is more the shadow of the real life to come. In fact, I even found where it says that in Hebrews chapter 8, where it says God showed Moses how to construct the tabernacle, which was a shadow of the real one in heaven. Right. And so I think that's what people are describing. So initially they're above their body, and then they travel generally and different ways. Some say it's through a tunnel, some it's through a path, some it's like through outer space, it seems like, because they can look back and see the earth leaving, which is strange. But different ways they travel to a place that is not unlike earth, exquisite beauty, mountains and forests and trees and flowers and grass, like you were saying, Carol, but all of it experienced in new dimensions of time and of space. And like I said, they're experiencing it with sensations that make our 5 senses feel dull in comparison. In that place or before, sometimes it's before, they will have a welcoming committee, a group of people who come to greet them. Generally, they're always people who have died before, generally relatives or friends, people who have spiritually built into them many times.
Isn't that
And
amazing?
interestingly,
Jesus
Jesus talked about this. Jesus said, use your worldly resources to make friends so that when
Mm.
it is gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home.
He did
Wow.
say that.
He did.
Yeah,
Wow. I never
all
put
this
that
is in
together.
all this is in the scripture, and it's amazing the correlations. When people then, there's this great reunion. There's hugging, there's kissing. We recognize each other. Even though people are, they say often in their prime.
Mm.
I actually have a theory about that, but there's no disability, there's no ailment. It's life the way it was always meant to be. And then many times people will see this God of light and love, and those who know Jesus know he's Jesus. Sometimes he appears looking like what we would think Jesus looks like. Sometimes he appears bright. They consistently say brighter than the sun, but
Mm.
not a light like the sun that's blinding. Instead, this light, they would say, in your physical body would just burn your retina out in an instant, and yet it's attractive. You want to look at it. And it's not
Yeah.
just light, it's love and life all combined.
Yeah,
And
it's
this
just
is not,
so attractive. It's so
I
amazing. I mean,
know.
it's what's not to deeply desire about that? I mean,
well, and
gee,
and they say this is not a force. This is not an impersonal
Right.
force.
No.
This is the God, and they know. I mean, all across the globe, they know this is God, and this God knows them intimately, better than they know themselves. They feel this unconditional love that in God's presence they never want to leave. And many times in his presence, another commonality is he will give them a life review.
Yeah.
Literally, they will
Yeah.
relive their lives from a kind of a third perspective. Now, you got to remember, indie ears commonly say time doesn't work the same on the other side.
yeah,
In
they
Right.
fact,
do.
some of them say exactly what Peter said in 2 Peter 3:8. To the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And they say the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah,
They
they
didn't
do.
know if it was an instant or, a lifetime.
But they all get this life review, or many of them do.
Hmm.
And
Yes,
it's important, isn't it?
it is. And it's exactly what Jesus promised as well.
Hmm.
He said there's a day coming where, nothing hidden, will remain hidden. Everything will be revealed, and the secrets and the motives of the heart.
Yeah.
So God looks at the heart. And he also says, when he comes in his Father's glory and with his angels, that every single person, that all will be revealed so that God can reward us. He wants to reward us. It's not and this is what indie ears commonly say, is that they watch their lives replayed, and what they're seeing is their interactions with people. That's what God is showing them. It's not so much what we accomplish that many times we value so much in this world. It's what
Yeah.
he values. And
Yeah.
what they come back consistently saying is God is love, and what he values is how we treat one another. And they experience their loving, kind actions and how it felt to the other people, and even how it rippled through humanity. They also experience their not kind actions, and they realize that they judge themselves. In fact, they talk often about how they clearly saw right and wrong. God was simply loving them, but they were judging themselves.
The
Now, this
thing
is
that I
interesting. Oh,
okay,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to make an interesting comment, because many NDE researchers originally hearing this said, oh, see, this has nothing to do with the God of the Bible, because there is no judgment. God does not judge, God just loves. People judge themselves. But again, if you know the Bible, Jesus said this. Jesus said, by your own words will you be acquitted, by your own words will you be condemned.
Yes, he
And all
did.
these, God is love. I mean, think
Yeah.
about what Jesus demonstrated to the adulterous woman that the Pharisees wanted to stone to death, right?
Yes.
He
Yes.
chases them off by saying, okay, go ahead. Whoever has no sin, you throw the first stone. They leave. And then he says, where are those who condemn you? Or who condemns you? And she
Right.
said, no one. said, neither
Yeah.
do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more. Right? So this is the God of NDEs. Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness because they will have the light that leads to life. And so this is
That
the life and light and love that NDEers are talking about, but it's exactly what Jesus came to reveal.
The thing that really struck me when they had the life review is that there was absolutely no condemnation from this being in light, from Jesus. There was only love. And that just really, really impacted me. And it was their own condemnation, their own, oh my gosh, that's right. I want to do this differently. I don't want to do this again. And so they were the ones, the people that wanted to change.
They were
But there
drawn
was,
into the truth, weren't they,
yeah, they
Carol?
were.
And then
And then,
they saw themselves for who they truly were.
yeah,
Yeah.
but there was no condemnation from Jesus, just love.
So, John, does it work the same for people that are not Christians? There was a story you had in there about a Jewish lady who
Right.
she knew it was Jesus and she didn't want to leave him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's so fascinating is I have heard these in Farsi. I've had a woman from Iran tell me in Farsi her experience and meeting Jesus, and that's how she became a follower of Jesus, from Muslim to follower of Jesus.
So
Because
she knew it was Jesus, did she?
Oh yeah, they know.
Wow.
They know. Yeah. Now, to be fair, her son was Hezbollah, but he had come to faith in Jesus, and he was praying for her.
Okay.
And when she had her near-death experience, she said, "This is really wild." I mean, I met them this summer, and they are sitting there at lunch with me, and he speaks English. She just speaks Farsi. And we were meeting. He just wanted to meet me, but he didn't even know I wrote this book about near-death experiences. They didn't know what a near-death experience was. And yet I asked, so he says, my mom is related to Muhammad, the prophet. And I said, is she Muslim? And he said, well, she used to be. And I said, well, what is she now? And he said, well, she's a follower of Jesus. And I said, well, how did that happen? He said, I'll let her tell you. She starts telling me in Farsi, and he translates about, she drops dead, leaves her body, is watching her son do CPR on her, looks to her right, and there's this brilliant man of light who she knows is Jesus, and he takes her hand and off they go. And she says he shows her this beautiful crystal palace, is what she called it, in this beautiful place, came back, and she's a follower of Jesus. Now, you were also talking about my friend Heidi. Yeah, Heidi grew up Jewish in an agnostic atheist family.
Right.
But she always believed in God. It was actually a very abusive family.
Okay.
And she would pray to God as a little girl and felt like God was right there at her bed, comforting her when she would pray. And at 16, her horse rears up, falls on her, and crushes her.
Oh my gosh.
Goodness.
She leaves her body, and said she was up about 30 feet in the air, looking down and thinking, I wish my sisters didn't have to see me die. She felt great, but she said, I wish my sisters didn't have to see me die. And then she sees this light. She said it was a cloudy day, but it was like there was a shadow being cast. There's this brilliant light, and she looks to her right. Again, there is Jesus. And he looks like Jesus to her, but she knows. I asked her, how'd you know it was Jesus? She said, you just know. There's just no doubt.
Oh,
Wow.
And she said this, though. This is what's fascinating. She said, it wasn't like I had to meet him. It's like I had always known him. And she said, when he gave me the life review, he showed me in the life review that when I was a little girl praying, he was sitting in the bed. He was there with me. It was Jesus who was there with me.
Oh
my goodness.
gosh, babe.
But there's only one God, so that shouldn't shock us.
No,
And
it
No.
should.
but he was showing her that, yes, I have been with you, even before you knew me, and that he's the one who sustains it all, right? by his power, all creation is sustained. So yeah, so she
Carol
came
and I
back.
were just so captured by the fact that they felt such love.
Right.
And there's a well-known prophetic guy in charismatic circles. You may have heard of him, Bob Jones, who's with the Lord now. But years ago, he died through being struck by lightning.
Right.
And he was asked the question, did you learn how to love? And he came back with alive with that theme. And that was what he was always on. You know, you need to learn how to love. He had a bumper sticker, still does, on his wife's car that says, have you learned how to love? And he came back by saying, that's my assignment, to learn how to love people, and on and on and on. And yet he was very accurate in a lot of his prophetic words that he shared. So this is something that we're thrilled about, because the message of the Father's love is one of the underpinnings of what we are all about, isn't it, Carol? I think the world needs to learn that one and have everything restored, like the last couple of verses in Malachi, that the hearts of the fathers are restored to the children and vice versa and so on. So this is a very, very important component, and the love they feel from the man of light, Jesus, is so strong that nobody seems to want to leave. And when they hear, no, it's not your time, you're going to have to go back, they're like, oh, please, no. They almost need to be talked into it a bit.
No, they do. And one of the things I love the most is how relatable God is. I mean, it's truly, I think sometimes it's shocking to us a bit when you hear them talking about how I argued with him. I don't want to going back. You know, like teenage girls saying no and kind of throwing a little fit in heaven. You know, but again, the scriptures tell us that Jesus was made like us in every way. Think about that. The God who created us loved his creation so much that he united himself with us eternally. I mean, Jesus still has a body. And that's what God was doing, was showing that, no, I understand your weakness. I understand your temptation. I understand your struggle. And you know what? You can come to me and find grace, you know, in your time of need, right? That's Hebrews.
So good.
And so that's what people commonly talk about as well. That, you know, some of my favorite ones are people who were blind from birth, and yet when they have a near-death experience, they can see, and they say the same things.
I know.
Like Vicky.
What's that like for a person who's never seen? Suddenly they've died, they're out of their body, and now they can see.
Well, they describe it in different ways. Like one said, it took me a while to adjust to seeing because I only knew things through taste and touch and smell. That was an 8-year-old kid named Brad. Vicky, she died at 22 in a car accident and then was resuscitated. And she said she was above her body and watching them frantically working on her. And she didn't know what she was seeing until she recognized her long hair and an orange blossom on her wedding ring. And when she recognized that, she realized, oh, that's me. And she said, why are they making such a fuss? I'm great. I'm here and I'm great. And she knew, you know, she knew Jesus. And she's like, okay, I'm out of here. I know where I'm going. And she shoots up through the roof of the hospital and finds herself coming out of a tunnel into this garden of grass and trees and flowers and birds singing, all these people, great gathering of people. And the people, she said, were made of light. And she looked at herself and she was physical, but also had light coming out of her as well. And then she sees Jesus, who is the brightest of them all. Now, this is fascinating because Daniel and Jesus say this. So in Daniel chapter 12, the angel says to Daniel, in the end, everyone will be resurrected. some to, eternal disgrace, some to eternal life. And those who lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars forever.
Yeah.
Jesus
Mhm.
said the same thing in Matthew 13. He said, the righteous will shine like the stars in my Father's kingdom.
Mhm.
And so I have come to the conclusion after studying it that when we see each other, it's just like on earth. Like, you don't always see me dressed in the same shirt, hopefully. I don't
Right.
always hear the same. And in heaven, it's the same. Sometimes Marv Bestman, a bank president, said he was wearing his favorite golf slacks and golf shirt.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
he
remember
sees people there outside the gates of heaven, and they were wearing, some were wearing saris, some were wearing, it looked like some kind of African garb,
Mhm.
that their native costume. But what people also report around the world are these people in what appear to be like robes of white, but they're not white. They're brilliant light, white light coming through.
Mhm.
And Jesus said this in Revelation, that he will dress the righteous, those whose names are in the book of life, in robes of white. Now, honestly, I used to think, I don't want to go running around forever in a robe of white, right? It's like,
No,
that didn't
John.
sound very appealing. But here's what I realized is, we change in heaven just like we change here. That's creative. And this robe of white, I believe, is actually translucent.
Mm.
I believe it actually is what allows the glory of God to shine through. Now
Shush.
think about this. All throughout Scripture, we're promised that we will share in the glory of God. Paul
Yeah.
says in Romans 8, we will share his glory if we share in his sufferings, in his
Yes.
hardship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many rewards, I believe, are having to do with how we share the glory of God. Jonathan Edwards, theologian of the
Yes.
past century, he said this. He said, I believe, and I agree with him, that in heaven we will all be overflowing to capacity with the love and light and joy of God. But we will overflow with different capacities.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the way we, and Jesus talked about this, very much, that the way we live our life. So heaven is a gift. Jesus died on the cross, and he offered a gift to everyone. Everyone who wants relationship with God forever can have it. All they have to do is call on the name of the Lord, and they will be saved, right? Romans 10 tells us that Jesus paid for God's justice to be done, so that God removed every barrier between humanity and himself except our pride. He won't force us to take him as God, which means he's ruler of my life. His will be done rather than just my will be done.
Yes.
And so Jesus paid for this free gift so that all who want God's forgiveness and leadership offered through Jesus, they've got it. Heaven's a gift. But the way we live our lives determines a lot of what we experience in eternity. And Jesus said this. He said, this is a test. This life is a test. He likens God to this king who's going to go away to be made king. He's a wealthy man. He entrusts 10 of his servants with his property and his riches. And he says, further my business. He comes back and he's king. Okay. And this is Jesus saying, when I come back and I'm king.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he says to the first one, what did you do with what I gave you? And he said, well, I took it and I multiplied it 10 times. He says, great, you're going to rule over 10 cities in my new kingdom. The second one said, I've multiplied it 5 times. You're going to rule over 5 cities, right? And then the one who didn't want him king just buried it, right? But he didn't want him king, and that was the key. And he was actually cast out into outer darkness.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other thing.
Yes.
23% of near-death experiences talk about hellish near-death experiences. And they
23%.
talk about that outer darkness.
I was going to ask you, because our friend Ian McCormick spoke at our church, and he died with box jellyfish stings, and he went
It was a
to
little
a-
dark and scary at
it was
first for
a
him.
little bit dark and scary. And then he cried out,
I forget whether he called for Jesus or
yeah, I
just
can't
God, but I
remember.
think he cried for
Well,
Jesus.
no,
So too.
yeah, I write about Ian in Imagine
Oh,
Heaven.
do
Yeah,
In
you?
fact,
you did.
I'm going to be talking to him this couple weeks from now.
Oh, please
But
give
Ian,
him our love.
I will. But yeah, Ian, he was on the way to the hospital and starts
Right.
having a flashback of his life and realizes, I'm dying.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he was pretty much an atheist at that point.
Right.
Right.
But his mom was a Christian. And, you know, for praying moms, listen to this.
You're right
I know.
on.
So good.
Because she was praying for him, and she had always told him, Ian, no matter how far from God you wander, you can always call in the name of the Lord and ask for forgiveness, and he will be there and he will forgive you. And he's sitting there thinking, I'm dying, you know, am I going to pray? And to what God? To Kali, Shiva, you know, the Buddha, Jesus? And his mom worshiped Jesus. So he was like, well, I don't even know how to pray. And then the Lord's Prayer comes into his mind. The first line,
Right.
forgive us our sins. And he confesses his sins and prays for forgiveness. And then the next line, as we forgive those who sin against us. And there were two men who had really harmed him and done him wrong that night. And he's like,
Right.
no way, I'm forgiving them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nothing else would come until he finally forgave them. And then the next line of the prayer.
Right.
And so he realized then in Jesus' presence that that's when God actually saved him, when he prayed that in the ambulance.
Yeah.
But he did have a taste.
He did.
And I don't understand that fully, except that maybe God was showing him, you know, yours was last minute.
Yeah.
This is what was going to be, but because you called out to me, I'm rescuing you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that actually happened to many people. In fact, 3 of my friends who are pastors today had hellish near-death experiences.
Wow.
And came back, and it was like Paul on the Damascus Road. They came back and they were changed. And
So you said about 29% or roughly a third have an experience of hell. Is that right?
well, and it's important to understand that's not the percentage of people who go to hell. Okay, that's
No,
No,
I
no, no.
realize. Yeah.
Yeah.
so people don't commonly talk about their near-death experience.
Right.
It is truly a sacred, otherworldly experience. It's not like a dream. It's so real. They say it's more real than this life. Well, how do you describe that? And then when
Yeah.
people look at them and go, you're weird, or it was the drugs, or, you know,
Yeah.
they just
Yeah.
stop talking. But of those who have come forward talking, 23% report hellish experiences. So they're not uncommon.
Wow.
And what we do see through them, though, is that God is a God of grace and mercy.
Is
Yes.
he ever?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, Jesus showed it right there on the cross. Father,
Yeah.
forgive them, as they're nailing the nails into his hands. There's nothing and no one he won't forgive, right? If we want it.
Yeah.
But we have to want it. You know,
Yeah.
one thief on the cross mocks him and says, hey, if you're really the Son of God, get yourself and get me down off the cross. He doesn't even listen. That's
Mm-mm.
pride.
Yeah.
The other thief says, what are you talking about? We deserve this. That's
Yeah.
humility.
Yes.
Jesus doesn't deserve this. And then he simply says, when you come in your kingdom, will you remember me? That's
Yeah.
it. And Jesus says, you'll be with me in paradise today.
That's quite the
Oh, love
repentance
that.
prayer right there, isn't it? It's
I
just,
know.
remember me.
Remember me. Yeah.
Now, here's an important thing I think to realize, though. I don't think the fact that many of these people who are on their way to hell call out to Jesus and he rescues them, I don't think that means we get a second chance.
Mm.
Yeah.
And because it says in Hebrews chapter 9, it's appointed for humanity to die once and then judgment. Yeah. And so a couple things to know. First of all, the judgment doesn't come until the end of human history. So the life review is not that. It's just maybe a preview, a learning opportunity to realize that everything Jesus said is true and love is what matters most. But the other commonality that these people say they have is they get to a point in their near-death experience where there's a border or a boundary they
Yeah.
knew they could not cross and still come back.
Yeah.
And that's very important, because I believe that whatever these near-death experiences are, it's not full biological death. In other words, they have not crossed into eternity, so they still have a chance to repent, to make a decision. But I think when they cross that border boundary, now this is John speaking, but I base it on Hebrews 9 as well. And I base it on Jesus' story of Lazarus, you know, and the rich man,
Yeah.
that there is a great chasm that you can't cross over.
Right.
And so in these near-death experiences, people still can be rescued, I believe, because they haven't crossed over into full biological death. And in fact, Jesus many times says that to him. He says, you know, you have to go back. Your purpose is not complete on earth. Or in some
Right.
cases, he says, you didn't die. Now, this is someone who's had a cardiac arrest. Their heart's not beating. They have no brain waves. They're flatlined. So what do you mean they didn't die? Well, we don't completely understand death yet, do we?
No.
You know, so
Yeah.
that's my best understanding.
Well, that is just so helpful, because you, like Carol and I, we do funerals from
Yeah.
time to time, and there's always this tension in the room with when you preach the good news of the gospel to people. They get a little antsy when they think, oh, here comes the pitch to get right with God kind of a thing. But it's such good news. And it becomes the elephant in the room many times when you start talking about death, and people have an aversion for talking about it without realizing how life-giving it is and how wonderful it is meant to be. And so we're just trying to get that word out, like, hey, don't miss this, whatever you do.
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, the people that I have talked to and interviewed, you know, I mean, this is life like you imagine it here. So the best thing you can do is think, what do I love about this life? Well, guess what? That's a gift from God, right? Now we can take any good gift of God and we can turn it and use it in ways that he didn't intend, but there is nothing good in this life that he didn't create or think up. You like, you know, you like the thrill of adventure? Well, guess who created you with the ability to thrill and adventure, right? I mean, imagine when we can explore the universe,
I
because
know.
You can
We're not-
hardly wait.
we're not limited by travel, you know, the way we're limited here.
I'm really looking forward to being able to fly without
I
an
know.
airplane. Won't that be awesome?
It will.
John,
Well, and
you
that-
mentioned there's an organization that kind of catalogs these experiences for people. And so there's a resource there that viewers could look at, or people can read. And one of them was sort of faith-based. What one was that again? I just forget.
Well, yeah, so it's actually interviews that I've done that are out on our website. So if you go to gatewaychurch.com, and right now if you click on What's After Life, so we've been doing this big series and I've interviewed about 20 people. So you can see all their videos of the people that are in the book Imagine Heaven, many of them,
Okay.
like Heidi, the Jewish woman, or Captain Dale Black, who is an airline pilot whose plane crashed in Los Angeles. No one survived. He comes back to talk about flying into the New Jerusalem and these gorgeous mountains up around it, and this beautiful landscape all around, and the wall, and he describes it all. Homes, these incredible homes that he says he was struck by the architecture of the homes, not so much the size, but just something divine about the architecture. Music that is like of another dimension. It's just exquisite. So
what is your website again exactly? Just so people
it's gatewaychurch.com. And if you go on, click on What's After Life, and you can see many the videos, and I did messages with their stories woven in. If that's not up on the site, go to Media Archives, and it's the What's Afterlife series.
Oh, I
Okay.
think that there's many people are excited about this being
Right.
presented from a Christian point of view, because for me, I was a bit confused about like why are some of these people drifting off into New Age kind of language and things, when it looks to me like it was Jesus they met,
Right.
so
Well, and I think there's a reason for that. When I first started studying it 30 years ago, I was confused too, because more and more of them initially were saying things like, it's all good, everyone goes to heaven, there is no hell, the Bible's view of the afterlife is gone, that's not what it's like at all. And they were saying these things. Now, it was premature.
yeah,
Because and what was actually happening is many of these near-death experiencers would go to their pastors, and their pastor didn't know what to do with it and would call it satanic or some weird new agey thing, and kind of push them out.
yeah,
Yeah.
They actually found embrace in the new age back in the 80s. And so many people would like, oh no, we can tell you all about that and what it means. And so this pool of people kind of gathered, and many of the researchers went to that pool, but they were forming a new age interpretation of it. So it took me studying thousands of them that weren't just from that local pool, but all over the globe, to start to see that no, what they are commonly reporting perfectly aligns with the Bible. Now, many times, if they don't have a biblical background, they might interpret it in whatever their own worldview is.
Right.
But what they're reporting commonly is amazingly aligned with the scriptures.
it was so helpful for how you presented it. It just settled me about it all.
Yeah.
I believed it, especially the Christian ones, but it was just that area of confusion. And there's another area too I wanted to ask you about, and that is, we shared this with a doctor that we know, and he says, oh yeah, I read studies on that, and apparently it's just the musings of a dying brain.
Yeah.
And let it go at that.
Yeah.
So you've heard that one too, I'm sure.
Yes. And Dr. Jeffrey Long, Dr. Pim van Lommel of Holland, Dr. Mary Neal, they're all doctors who have either had one of these near-death experiences or studied them. I mean, Dr. Long has studied more than I have. He's studied and collected 4,000 of them in 31 languages.
Oh, my.
Oh, wow.
He actually became a Christian studying them.
Oh.
Because so many people around the globe experienced Jesus, not other gods, but Jesus.
Yeah.
And but what he said is, first of all, there is absolutely no reason that a dying brain should remember anything. It shouldn't. If you have a materialistic view, which with that would be, it means that every memory and what we are is simply in our minds. It's just a neural network. It's just electrodes, firing that cause these memories. So when you have people who have a heart attack and they're flatlined and they're dead, some of them 90 minutes, an hour and 45 minutes with proof, and doctors who would say it.
Yeah.
There is no reason whatsoever they should be able to come back and have any memory of the extent of that time that their brain was absolutely flatlined. So it doesn't make sense at all.
Yes.
Also, it's a very lucid, ordered experience. And that's common with children, blind people, people of all different cultures. And one other thing, the Gallup poll did a survey and found that 1 out of 25 people have had one of these near-death experiences.
That's amazing.
It's really
Now,
amazing.
a survey in Holland and Germany found about the same percent, about 4% of the population. So how do you get millions of people to conspire to make something like this up?
Yeah.
And in my book, I focused on people like doctors and bank presidents and commercial airline. I mean, people who why would you make something like this up and then ruin your career going around
Yeah,
talking about it when
exactly.
people just think you're crazy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
it is just amazing how there's still an element of faith in here that we need to step into.
Yeah.
The story of the rich man and Lazarus from Luke 16, you know, it has a lot to say. It's worth, if you're watching this, it's worth you rereading that
Yes.
story. But in verse 31, Abraham answers and said, no, if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets,
Mhm.
neither will they believe, even if one were to come back from the dead. Okay, Jesus is telling the story, and I think he's got himself in mind when he said that. He came back from the dead, and still people
Yeah.
don't believe that. And yet, now it's like the Lord is pulling back the veil on this
Mm.
and letting people see, hey, there's a reality at the end of your life. And I've often thought, you know, if Carol and I go on vacation somewhere, I don't know, Hawaii for the first time, maybe, we got brochures and we read up on it. We wanted to see what is it like over there so that we can, you know,
Mhm.
be somewhat prepared. Well, everybody's going to die. And what comes after that? I think it's just wise to prepare yourself a little bit and check this out. Because
Definitely.
like you said, there are millions
Mm.
of witnesses across the globe, 1 out of 25
I
people. That's
know. That's
amazing.
amazing.
And the other side of it is if you're there when someone dies, they often have very
Mm.
interesting reactions. Like we were with
Mm.
my mother when she passed away. And one of the things that she said was, look at all the angels.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we're like, Mom, like, what are you seeing? Like, what's going on? She said, the room is filled
With
with angels.
angels. I know.
And we're like, wow, how cool that she's
Yeah.
seeing all that. But then she was gone, like in a minute, just
Yeah.
breathed out the longest breath, and that was it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Carol's dad,
Yeah.
he sat up in bed, raised up his arms, and then
Fell back dead.
that was it.
And so just as
And so these are things that people of old families in the past were well aware of.
yeah.
But now today we've managed to distance ourselves so much from death that
And sanitize it all. And
that
yeah.
someone else handles it all, and people are not even aware of what goes on a lot of times. But it's very real, and I can promise everyone watching that one day you
Yep.
will die unless Jesus comes and takes you before that happens. And so why not think about it and
Yeah.
look into it? I really recommend John Burke's book, Imagine Heaven, because it will bless your
It
heart.
will
It
really
will.
bless your heart. And I encourage you to read it slowly and maybe read it to each other. That's what John and I did. And it just so brought heaven alive. So John, we really, really thank you because it's just impacted our lives and with the love, just accentuated so much. I mean, I know Jesus really loves me, but reading your book, I just couldn't get over the magnitude of his
Especially
love
the colors
and
part.
the colors and the flowers, and I could
Yes.
pick bouquets, and
Oh.
then they didn't die, and just
Well, John, you shared how your book is in many languages. I think you said 40 or something like that. And that's amazing. You can get it in French and German and Spanish and Russian and several languages. So this is really good
yeah.
news, friends. I encourage you to get it in your own languages. And one last thing, our time is gone. So thank you so much, John, for joining us today.
Yes.
But
No, it's been a privilege. Thank you.
if you've had a near-death experience, I want you to write to us.
Yeah.
You can write to Carol and I. Go to our website, johnandcarol.org. There's a box there where you can fill in your story. We would love to hear it. Or you can write to John and his website, and we'll post that up on mine in case you didn't catch it. But this needs to be told, friends. So don't hide it away.
Yeah.
Don't keep it all to yourself through embarrassment or people think you're crazy or whatever. We want the world to hear that God is pulling back the veil on this. And many of you maybe need to make a decision to follow Jesus Christ. He is the Savior of the world. He came because God so loves you, and he paid your debt and mine when he traded his life for our life on the cross, because he knew there's life beyond the cross. And for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. So call upon him and just say out, God, if you're real, I want to get to know you because I want to be prepared for eternity. Amen. Well, thanks again, John. It's been a pleasure really getting to know you. And
well, thank you so much for your ministry, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's been great.
Our pleasure. All right. Until next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.